Okay, welcome everybody to another Faith-Seeking Understanding. I am Alan Bevere, your host. I am a pastor, retired professor, Bible moth, theologian in exile, and a peddler of hope. I am the self-appointed Anselm of Canterbury Chair of Podcast Theology and Culture here at Faith-Seeking Understanding University, a completely fabricated institution of higher learning, but where all seekers are invited to ponder profound things. And this morning, I am with the illustrious Grand Poobah Chair of Economics and Public Theology here,
Right.
Michael Cruz. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing fine. How are you this
I'm
morning?
doing, I'm doing great. Um, your Royals and my Guardians, we got to the playoffs. We made a
We
good run
did.
of it. I don't think anybody was expecting either team to do that, and they did.
No.
So, it's hard, when you're a Cleveland fan, there's always next year is like you've been saying, I've been saying it since I could talk. So
Right. Right.
it's frustrating, but at the same time, they did well and the Royals did well and those Yankees, who are the devil's spawn,
Right.
just continued to be a problem for your Royals and then my Guardians. But I got to give them credit. Boy, those they there's when I watched the ALCS, we were watching it.
Yeah.
And after one more home run, I said to my wife, I said, there's a reason why they lead their league in home
Yeah,
run.
exactly right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I hate to do it, but give them some credit. They've done well. And so, yeah, they're going to play the Dodgers. And
Yeah.
as a
Two of my
as a friend of mine says, the Dodgers and the Yankees in the World Series, capitalism wins.
There you go. That's right. Well, two of my least favorite teams, but it will be fun to
Yeah.
see Judge participate in the World Series and Otani and be hopefully that there
Yeah.
can be some memorable moments with the
Well,
two of
hopefully,
them.
hopefully so. Hopefully so. I mean, is there a way for both of them to lose, Michael?
Well,
Just asking for a friend.
I've been working on figuring that out. I haven't found
Okay.
it yet, but I'm working on
Okay.
it.
All right. And then football, real quickly. Your
Yeah.
Chiefs, the only undefeated team in the NFL. Of course, if you didn't have the officials on your side, hey, who knows
Yeah,
what
that's
the
right.
record would be?
Right.
We always need to have a deeper explanation for things, don't we, Michael?
Oh,
It's not
yes.
enough to just say, the Chiefs are really good.
Yeah. I have a front office that is almost mind-bendingly brilliant in terms of
Yeah.
how they get players and what they do with things. It's amazing. So,
Yeah, and so yeah, so it's got to be the officials. Yeah, it's just amazing. In football, it's not a big deal, but when you start taking this kind of conspiracy stuff to other
yeah,
places, then it gets dangerous. So,
that's exactly right. Yeah.
but anyway, and the Browns, Deshaun
Yeah.
Watson, who of course I am not a fan of, but who I would never wish ill will, is out
Yeah.
for the season with his ACL, and that's not good news. But the Browns, have been pretty much terrible all year, and I don't see that getting any better. But hey, it's all right.
I hear talk about them moving to the suburbs. Is that true?
Yeah, that they are. They're going to move to
Yeah.
Brook
Yeah.
Park. Well, yeah, I'm disappointed about that. I think that what happened over the last 20 years is that they really created a great entertainment and sports district in that area of Cleveland.
Hmm.
Uh, the entertainment theater district is there. It's wonderful. It's actually after New York, it's the largest theater district in the country.
Wow.
And between that and then the Cavs and the Guardians and the Browns, and then of course a lot of our minor league teams, we have minor league hockey, minor league other
Yeah.
stuff. It's just been a great thing, and I'm very disappointed that they made the decision to do that. I think they want the Dome Stadium,
Ah,
so
yeah.
uh, because nothing says football in Cleveland like playing in 70-degree weather in December. Uh,
Right.
So
Exactly.
I am very disappointed with the decision, but
Yeah. What are you
what
going to
it
do?
is.
Yeah.
It's what it is. So anyway, all right. Well, now we need to move on to important stuff.
Yeah.
So two things, Michael. So we got an election coming up next week, and We are going to talk about the Electoral College, and then we're going to talk about our predictions for the election. So let's talk
Yeah.
I said electrical
Electrical.
college. It is electrical.
It's
People get
shocking.
animated, right? Right.
Right.
Yeah, just you want to start a discussion on social media, just say you like or you don't like the Electoral College and see what
Right.
happens. But
Yeah.
so the Electoral College is a system the founders set up for several different reasons, but it basically is a system where winner takes all in states. States are apportioned delegates according to population, and the winner takes all. The exceptions are Nebraska and Maine, if I got this correctly,
Mhm.
where they proportion their delegates according to population. States run elections, so according to the Constitution, so states can do this if they want, but only two have
Right.
done it. Um, and so it is feasible, and we've seen it actually twice in the last 25 years, where a person can lose the popular vote but win the electoral college and be elected president. And that's the way it is. You know, the founders had a disagreement among themselves over who should vote. I always want to remind people who like to go after the elitists of the culture, whoever they are,
Right.
is that the founders were elitists.
Yes, exactly.
They they didn't think everybody was smart enough to vote. They didn't
Right.
think everybody should vote. Of course, you know, it was white men. There was no thought about women
Right.
and African Americans voting, and then there was debate over landowners. Do you have to be a landowner to vote? So, you know, they're pretty elitist in this time. They didn't agree on actually how to do this. So, you know, the electoral college part of it too was the slave states were concerned about proportional representation. So they wanted their slaves counted, even though they couldn't vote and even though they were property. So they came up with this system of one third. Every slave was counted as a third of a person,
Right.
and so that's what they did. So it's the electoral college. So anyway, Michael, what are your thoughts on that initially?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a historical attempt to try to balance a number of different factors that were happening at the time. My understanding is this was a compromise situation. I think it was actually was it 2/5? Each slave counted 2/5 of a person or something like
Oh,
that.
2/5. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I had
yeah,
that wrong. 2/5.
yeah. I think it's that. I think that's what it was. Anyway, but the idea was is that you're trying to balance out the population issues across the states in the South, in the North, slavery being a central piece in that. Although I don't think slavery was the only issue. There was the issue of a direct democracy versus being a republic, with each state having its own identity and input as a state into the election process. So yeah, most countries, major countries around the world, have gone to direct democracy to elect their top executive. There are still a few countries. I think India, Britain. I think maybe Germany. I'm trying to remember what I was looking at this recently. I can't remember. There's at least two or three major democracies that still. It's not an electoral college per se, but it's also not direct democracy either in terms of how the national leader is selected. So we aren't alone in that. And I think there were probably a lot of, they did the best they could in terms of coming up with what they wanted. I, in the past, would have said that I understand the Electoral College. It's probably okay. I don't think it's necessarily the best system, but it was probably okay. More recent years, I'm moving more towards the idea that probably direct democracy would be the best, mainly because I think it would improve people's trust in the electoral system. I think in the past 25 years or so, with the continual close elections and having um, all these tight races decided by a handful of states, I think that erodes people's trust in the electoral process over time. Unfortunately, I don't see how you possibly change this, not in our lifetimes.
Yes.
So the only uh, option that I have seen that looks feasible, and I think it has challenges. And I forgot I left that over my desk. I wrote down the name of this act that various states are passing, which is they say that if a number of states, similar states, will all pass the same act together, and the total of those states equals 270 electoral votes or more, that those states that pass this act will simply cast their votes for whoever wins the popular vote.
Yeah.
And so if you have 270 states that are lined up that way, it won't make any difference whether the other states go by electoral college or by popular vote. The one with the 270 is it's what's going to determine the election. I think they're up to like 207 electoral votes, as I recall. The number of states that have selected that. I think Minnesota recently joined. I think got that right. So you need about 63 more electoral votes. And looking at the map and who hasn't passed it, it's hard to see. Maybe 20, 30 more votes, but it's hard to see how you get above 270 based on the states that you'd have to get. So not real hopeful it's going to change. So at some level, it seems to me it's an interesting academic question, but in terms of what's actually going to happen in our elections in the future, is there much we can do about it?
Yeah, and a constitutional amendment is just out of the question. I mean, you're just not going to get the requirements for a constitutional amendment. It's not going to happen. So this is the only other option. And so I don't know, maybe you've got to have more elections decided by the Electoral College and not popular vote or something to really at some point, get some motivation from some others. But you're right. I think this is our system for the foreseeable future. And it is our system, whether people like it or not. When Donald Trump was elected in 2016, right? He didn't get the popular vote, regardless of what he says.
Right.
But he wins the Electoral College. I had friends who were very upset about that and saying, well, he's not my president. He didn't win the popular vote. And I said, stop it. These are the rules we play by, right?
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, they're the rules we play by. So he won. He won fair and square. So, these are the rules we play by. We got to win it. And, if a Democrat would ever lose the popular vote and win the Electoral College, the shoe would be on the other foot. But it's the way that it is.
Well, and I remember reading articles. I did go back and look this days ago. Now I couldn't cite all the details for you. The presumption that I hear a lot debated in the social media and stuff is that this electoral college stuff all benefits Republicans. It's always the Republicans who will benefit from it. But I remember reading articles back in the 2012 election that showed that Obama actually, because of the nature of the electorate, the electoral college actually favored him.
Yeah.
So it's not just that it favors one particular party all the time. It can favor either party depending on the electoral makeup of how the parties, the coalitions that the parties have put together. Yeah. So that can affect it as well. So it's trying to figure out how do I, I'm trying to figure out how I gauge how I say this. It's a problem. It's not the hugest problem that some people want to make it out to be.
No,
it's not nothing either. So I think that's the that's how I characterize it.
Yeah, and the argument that if you abolish electoral college, the rural conservative states would get no attention. I have a, and I at one point thought that was true, but I have a friend, and she's a math whiz.
Yeah.
And she and I had some conversation about this, and she demonstrated to me very clearly that's just not true.
Right.
You need the popular vote. So that means you're going to need Wyoming and you're going to need Kansas, for example, that you're going to need them. And so that it's not nothing. You can't say that they'll be ignored because you just need all these states you need people to vote. So yeah, and I agree with you. I think it's time to abolish it if we could. That's a change of mind within the last 4 years on my part. But I think we're better off if we would do that. But again, I don't think it's going to happen, and I think we're just going to be in this. So okay, well, there we go.
Yeah, it's kind of is what it is.
It is what it is. It is what it is. So we'll see what happens.
I did think somebody. You were again getting into sort of the nerdy weeds here on some of this. You posted an article on Facebook, and I saw that as well, about how in this election there's lots of talk that Trump is drawing Latino and Black voters, that he's cutting into just a little bit, not much, but in certain instances that could be a big deal, cutting into Black and Hispanic voters. And yet at the same time, and I can remember if the article brought this up, but at the same time, Harris is making big inroads with white women. All right. And so if you were at a national level, if it was just a national vote, getting the number of votes from blacks and Hispanics could be quite consequential for you because they're a fairly large part of the overall population, and you would be able to pull those votes your direction. But what if the states that are swing states have disproportionately small portions of Hispanics and blacks relative to the national number? Well, then stealing some proportion of those only helps you marginally in that state. Meanwhile, if you have white women, and also they talked about Harris pulling some of the non-college educated white voters are also drifting slightly her direction. I mean, non-college educated white voters like 51% of the population in Wisconsin. So just a small shift with those counteracts a 10-point shift with Hispanics in Wisconsin. So the idea of being able to pull those, because of the way the electoral college is set up, it actually hurts Trump because of that
Right.
that breakdown. So it's just not quite so
Yeah.
hard and fast as to how you cut this and who it benefits and who it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So if Trump is starting to, if he's cut some inroads, let's say the black vote, well, if a proportion, a higher proportion of those voters are in Alabama, right, or
Right,
Mississippi,
exactly,
it
right.
doesn't make a
It's
difference
irrelevant.
because they're going to go red. We know that Mississippi is not in play,
Yeah,
Alabama's not in play. It doesn't
right,
matter. So
right,
this might be, and again, I emphasize the word might be an election where the electoral college ultimately works against him.
right. It
Right,
could.
as opposed to working against Democrats. We don't know that. We got to wait, but
Yeah, we'll
it
see.
is a possibility. So,
Right.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right, Michael. Well, we are now at prediction time,
Oh boy.
and as I always say when we do this, I said if I no one has ever offered me a job to do prognostication. And if you look at my past record, you know why. But
Yeah.
we do need to make some predictions. So let's just start with president. And
Yeah.
we'll start with you. Who do you think? Um, and neither one of us, no one should think either one of us is absolutely certain of our predictions, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Who do you think wins the presidency?
I think, all things considered, I would put towards Harris in terms of winning the presidency. The independent polls that have been done for the past 6 weeks, and I'm not talking about the whole cluster of Republican sketchy polls that are fed out there to feed into the aggregators, um, all consistently show they're tied or with a very slight margin in most of the swing states. All right. So those have not really changed much. And she hasn't been able to persuade in big numbers people her direction during those 6 weeks. So that really says is that what you're now down to is the turnout game. You've got to get people who can get people out to vote best. The Harris campaign has the most money by far to do this, and they are the best organized for a ground campaign in turning out these voters. That's the reason I think that they'll ultimately prevail. I suspect that they'll probably win the blue wall, the states, the Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. I suspect she'll win those. I think. Let me say this. So I think that that's the minimum that she does. Is she gets those three states. I can see scenarios where she sweeps all the swing states. I could see that possibly happening. Um, we'll just have to see what occurs. I think on election night, if we start seeing that, if particularly if they're able to call Pennsylvania and Michigan, which will be in the Eastern time zones, if they are able to call those states, and then we see either North Carolina or Georgia, already, trending that direction that they can see those, I think that, well, it's a done deal. I mean,
Yeah.
I think she's basically won the election if that happens. If you see her really faltering in Pennsylvania and even Michigan, then I think you've got serious
Yeah.
concerns, because if she can't win those, she probably can't win some of these other closer states in Arizona and
Right.
Georgia and some of those others. So we'll just have to see what happens. That's my best guess. I think she probably wins. I think a I don't say likely, but I think a very realistic outcome is that she would have something that comes close to what Biden has, maybe swapping Georgia for North Carolina. I think she
Right.
could North Carolina, lose Georgia, something like that. Nevada, she could win or lose. There's 6 votes there. Who knows about Arizona? But so anyway, I think it could be in that range. I mean, and I think this is unlikely, but it's not out of the realm of possibilities. If they're able to really get a big turnout wave in these states and going, I mean, they were showing Iowa was with like 4% within the margin of error, and Alaska was another interesting one as well too, that is very close. That's elected a Democratic member to the House in recent elections and so on. And also, I think the since 2020, two things have happened. There is the January 6th event that happened, and then there was the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And those are two things that I think have motivated a large number, particularly of women, to register to vote who were not registered before. And I think it will tend to activate people who've been rather lapsed voters or maybe never voted much, who may be turning out in this election. And those people are not captured in polling information because usually they're doing likely voters, and they usually determine likely voters by whether or not they voted in the last congressional election and the last presidential election. By definition, those people didn't vote in those. So I think that and then I should say those, the increase in registration by those people then also tells you that that demographic is probably also energized as well, which means those people who haven't voted frequently that are in that demographic may vote this time in ways they haven't in the past. So, yeah, I can see it going to Trump. I mean, I'm not saying it can't happen or it won't happen,
Right.
but right now my feel is that she will pull this out. And the other thing is too, I'll just add this one piece, and I'll let you
Sure.
get to what you're saying. The other thing is too, there's so many conflicting and competing interpretations of what's happening with the data and what's going on. There are campaign watchers. I think you posted the article by Michael Moore,
Yeah.
who correctly called Donald Trump's election. He correctly called the Biden election. He correctly poo-pooed the red wave that was supposed to happen in 2022. And he's just adamant that Harris is going to win this election. James Carville, who I've seen interviewed several times, is very positive about her. If you just get out the vote, get people going, that she'll win this. So that's a non-scientific way of looking at things, but these are people who are very much in the mix of things, who have been fairly accurate in recent years, and being able to read the tea leaves. So anyway,
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah. No. Well. Yeah, that's all good. Yeah, I'm inclined to say Harris will win. I think one thing that needs to be mentioned, you referred to abortion, that one thing that's not been talked about much on the news is that abortion is a referendum in Arizona and Florida.
Exactly. Yes.
And that's going to turn people out. And if there is one surprise that might happen on election night, one surprise, I'm not saying it's certain,
Yeah.
Harris flips Florida.
Yeah.
I'm not, I mean, there's a good reason why pollsters are saying that it's leaning, but leaning Republican, but
Right.
I think that could flip.
Yeah.
And because of what you've said about the motivated voters, the voters who haven't voted, it's interesting. Texas, Ted Cruz is,
Yes.
now I don't think we're going to flip Texas. I don't think the Democrats will flip Texas, and but
At the presidential level.
at
Yeah.
the presidential level. But
Yeah.
I do think that there's a reason why these states are leaning as opposed to likely. And
Right.
So I think Florida could be the surprise
Yeah, right.
um, on election night. So we'll see. We'll find out. But I do think that she probably wins a tempered probably. But again, there's all kinds of factors. And I've not put a lot of trust in polls. I don't
Yeah,
discount them. I don't discount
right.
them. But again, there's so many factors, as you say, and people have been so wrong. And
Yeah,
I just think we need to look at the registrations, the
yeah,
amount of registrations that have that happened after the Democrats changed from Biden to Harris. So,
right.
but we'll see. But I do think I do
Yeah.
think she probably pulls it out.
Well, I was watching one analyst, which I thought was particularly interesting. He started a new company this election round, and I'm sorry I don't have his name or the name of the company, but I watched an interesting presentation by him online, and his whole thing is about monitoring registration, doing detailed and comprehensive analysis of voter registration. And so his point was he was not looking for the total number of people registered to vote or which groups were registering to vote a little more than others. He was looking for peaks and valleys,
Wow.
big spikes, big drops, people registering to vote. And he said there's only been 3 events in the past 12 months where he had noticed a particular spike in registrations to vote. The first one was right after Kamala Harris entered the race. When Biden dropped out and she entered, there was a big spike in voter registration. There was a spike in voter registration after the Democratic convention. And then there was a spike in voter registration after Taylor Swift's thing about getting out to vote. And he said the people registering to vote are disproportionately younger and disproportionately women. And he said, but they're also among women of color. It's like more than triple, quadruple the number that you would expect in a normal year. And so he said, when the polls do not measure intensity, they can't tell you
Right.
how committed people are to voting. And he says voter registration is a more accurate indicator of some of that because it's people actually taking an action. They're
Yeah.
they're actually doing something as opposed to just answering a pollster.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another reason that gives them hope for that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Good
yeah,
point. Really good point. All right.
yeah. So what's your thoughts?
No, I'm with that. I again, I do think it's motivation, and we all know this. That I think one other thing, along with that, um, Donald Trump is not appealing to swing voters. He's not appealing to the middle. He's
No,
doubling down. His language is getting more extreme.
yeah,
He's feeding his base.
yeah,
His base is with him. I mean,
oh yeah,
they're already with him. They're going to vote
yeah,
for him.
yeah,
So, we all know within that stretch, and I do understand what people are saying is that Kamala Harris is not, she is maybe not as persuaded as many people as the Democrats would like,
right,
but she is making an appeal,
right,
and Trump just isn't, and
yeah,
his party just isn't, and I saw a video. It was a CNN video. They didn't Maggie Haberman, the
right,
journalist who probably knows Trump about as well as any journalist. That was saying she was saying yesterday or the day before that at first his Trump's handlers were saying, don't be using this negative language, don't be talking about migrants being animals and this or the other. It's just not going to attract swing voters, in fact probably turn them off.
right.
Well, I mean, by the way, Trump's talk about immigrants, anybody who knows Trump's history, he's
Yes,
always hated immigrants.
yes, right,
He,
right,
he always has.
right,
Yeah. Um, he's just not making these appeal. This is not what in other words, this is who he is. And so
yes,
he's
right,
doubling down on it. So the other thing, it's a long way to say that um, I just see his movement shrinking.
yeah,
He may have made some inroads with some African American men and things like that, but
right,
the reality is I just don't see his appeal broadly
right,
now. That might be my
right.
own ignorance, but I just think that's the case.
One of the analysts, I can't remember if it's A.B. Stoddard or who it was that I was listening to one time. She made an observation that I hadn't really processed the way she had, but I thought it was very insightful. And so, like you were just saying, many of his advisors are telling him, toe down the message. You got to appeal to the people in the middle. You got to, make this broad tent, build the coalition a little bit. And said, as a narcissist, he can't do that. He is constitutionally incapable of doing that. Um, they showed a clip, talking, well, you need to appeal to Nikki Haley voters. And so he was on Fox and Friends, and somebody asked him about, well, having Nikki Haley at your event. He says, I beat Nikki Haley. I beat her by 40, 50, 90%, bigger than anybody's ever, in South Carolina. And so so he went on the attack against Nikki Haley. And they're talking about trying to get Nikki Haley voters. And so they gave like 3 or 4 examples of this kind of thing where the stuff that you would normally think that a candidate would do to try to build the tent at the end, he avoids doing. So why is he doing that? And so her trying to get it into his mind, which is a scary place to be, but trying to get into his mind was suggesting that this sort of authoritarian, bravado, big tough guy kind of thing is his shtick.
Yeah.
He thinks that that's what's got him here, and he thinks that that's what's ultimately going to get him over the top and get him the win.
Right.
And just the arrogance that I know better than you do in terms of his campaign advisors. I know better than you do how to win an election, and you can't tell me to do this, and I'm not going to do it precisely because you're telling me to do it. I mean, it's almost this sort of 3-year-old mentality to it, and that it's partly just the exercise of his personality and his ego that he's incapable of it. Interesting.
Yeah.
So,
Haberman has said on many occasions that he thinks he's his own best spokesperson. So
yeah.
right. So he's gonna do this. By the way, if you're watching on YouTube and you see me blowing my nose and everything, I apologize for that. I've been muting the mic, but it's autumn allergies in Ohio, so that's all I'll just say. Anyway.
Right.
Yeah. So okay. Good conversation. All right, let's go to the Senate. Do the Democrats keep the Senate, Michael? What do you think?
Wow. It's interesting. I mean, obviously they're losing Joe Manchin, so now you're down to 50-50.
Yeah.
Tester looks very shaky in Wyoming, although I did see one Democratic senator saying that in a recent poll that it showed them within the margin of error, which means he's still losing. It's euphemism for saying he's losing, but he's close. But he was also just pointing out that Montana has been a polling and prediction nightmare over the years, trying to figure out exactly how that state's going to go. He is an incumbent, generally well liked. The guy that he's running against is out of state, but big money. He's been spending a lot of money there. I'm inclined to think he's going to lose, but he could win that. I think he'll lose. So then the next question, now you're down to 49 Democrats in the Senate. And so you've got to pick up one someplace else. I think the only 3 places that you possibly pick up support is either in Texas with Allred or down in Florida. You could pick up a senator seat there. I forget the woman's name is running against Scott, but running a very good campaign and staying close. And then there's also the independent in Nebraska, which seems to be pulling ahead of the Republican there. If one of those 3 manages to pull out, then you got a 50-50. And I think that's where it would likely either Tester or one of those 4, I think, possibly wins an election, and then you're at 50-50. Feels like more like 49-50. I could be totally wrong. Tester could win. 2 of these people could win, and you'd have a 52-48.
Yeah.
I think that's the optimistic side of it.
Yeah.
I think it's more likely 49-51 for Democrats down a seat, or 50-50. That's my guess.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I do think Democrats keep the Senate. And if Kamala Harris wins, that means that we have a vice president who's a tie-breaking vote for the Democrats.
Exactly.
So functionally, if you get a tie vote, it puts the Democrats in the driver's seat. So
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to say that they keep the Senate. And they're not going. I mean, I don't see them making big gains.
Oh, no.
Although I'm going to say this. I'm going to say what people
No.
said in 2022, and it may be
Yeah.
completely wrong because it wasn't a presidential election year.
Right.
But no red wave materialized. I just
Right.
don't think there's going to be anything materialized for the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And so I do think the Democrats keep the Senate, but it's still pretty divided stuff, and we'll see from there. But I do agree with you that Florida could flip Democratic, Texas possible. I mean, I just need to say, just honestly, if Ted Cruz lost the election, you know, I would I would not mourn.
No, not either.
Uh,
Yes.
uh, and but I don't know. There's also a part of me that says, Texas has kind of been fool's gold for Democrats for a long time.
Yeah.
That
I will say that in Texas, and I'll say this: I don't think that Harris can win either Florida or Texas this round.
No, well, not Texas, certainly not.
Yeah. Well, but on Texas, I actually think Texas has more future promise than
Yeah,
Florida,
right.
and the reason is because the margin of victory has shrunk for the last 4 or 5 presidential
Yeah,
elections. It used to be 20 some odd percent
yeah,
for the Republican. Last election, it had shrunk down to a 5% margin
yeah,
for Trump. I think it shrinks down to maybe 2%,
yeah,
2.5%, something
yeah,
like that for Trump. In 2028, because of the way the demographics are shifting, the way things
yeah,
are going, there, I think it's possibly it could be a battleground state
yeah,
in 2028.
yeah.
But I
Good
don't
point.
see any way that Harris can. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's an outside chance, 5%, less than 10%, that she might be able, in some miraculous,
Yeah,
really wave of voters here at the end, like I was talking about, that Texas could flip. I think more likely to flip if you have a big wave would be Alaska. I think something like that with its 3 electoral votes,
mm,
and maybe something like Iowa or something like
yeah,
that. I think those would flip before Texas or Florida
yeah,
would.
right.
But
Okay.
those are the only other 2 places I could think of where there's a
Yeah,
chance, and that's a total of what, Alaska and Hawaii and Iowa are like together 7 votes. So,
yeah,
but still, yeah,
yeah. But it would certainly upset the night, though, to think that
yes,
a Democrat pulled those two states, so
yeah,
which have consistently been red. So,
yeah, right,
all right, let's talk about the House. Republicans have the House, I think 5 seats, I think
yeah,
majority, if I'm correct.
yeah.
Um, what do you think?
I think they have less than that now because of the
That's right.
resignations. They may be
That,
only 2 or 3 seat
that's
majority.
right. That's right.
Yeah. So yeah, I think so. And this I have done less analysis of, and I've read less about in terms of what happens here. But I just think that if Harris wins the election, that there will be some coattail effects to that in some places. And even if she's just very close or doesn't quite win it, I think it's still possible you could see the House flip to Democrats. So maybe Democrats up by 5 seats or something like that. I think is a realistic expectation,
Yeah.
and based on what I've said, but I can't base that on any strong statistical analysis of
Yeah.
house district by house district that I've heard people go for. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. I do think that, I mean, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, it's possible. It's possible that the Democrats could win the House, but again, it's going to be really close. Of course, the difference in the House from the Senate is that even if you have a one vote, majority, man, you're
yeah,
in control,
yes,
right?
yeah,
You
right,
get to
yeah,
do what you want as opposed to the Senate where that's not the case, right?
exactly, right,
So we don't know for sure. In Ohio, the one issue on the ballot is issue one, which takes the responsibility for redistricting out of those state legislature, put it
right,
into the hands of an independent commission made up equally of Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And of course, the Republicans oppose it at the moment because they're in the majority. And the only time a party is opposed to gerrymandering is when they're the party not in power, right?
yeah, right, yeah,
So right now the Democrats are really opposed to this and want it to pass, and the Republicans don't.
right,
Um, we have historically, when this has come up, overwhelmingly passed to take it out of the hands of the legislature, but the legislature has found crafty ways to ignore it.
Right.
And this is on the ballot because the Supreme Court of the state of Ohio, which actually has more Republicans than Democrats on it, had said repeatedly that the state legislature's gerrymandering was unconstitutional, and they threw it back to the legislature several times, and
Right.
they redrew districts, but to make it just as partisan as it was, and they kept throwing
Right.
it back. So this is finally. So it's interesting. The former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is a Republican who's the one who wrote this bill and sponsored it.
Right.
So my hope is that it passes
Right.
because we really do need to take redistricting out of the hands of the legislatures because
Absolutely. Yeah.
it doesn't matter which party is control. Is
Right.
in control. The temptation is too strong
Right.
to draw the districts in a way that favor your party. And we've got to get that. We got to stop that because there's just not enough competitive districts in the House.
Yeah. I think that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens with that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, so if that's the election results, we talk president, talk senator, we're talking about the House. I'll just add this, maybe,
Yeah.
how far you want to go here, but I think there's one thing to acknowledge, and that is that the election will not be over November 5th, 6th, or 7th,
No.
even once the results are tallied. Donald Trump, at every one of his appearances, every one of his rallies, says, "I'm leading in all the polls." This is his constant refrain. And there's evidence of people both in the 31 organizations of highly suspect credentials that are putting out polls that are favorable to him so that they get fed into the aggregator to inflate his numbers. There's the betting markets are easily influenced by high finance people to try to make them look a different direction. So they are leaning towards Trump in both the polls and those betting markets. And I will predict this for you now. This is a solid prediction of which I'm 100% sure. On election eve, election night, or early in the morning of the next day, Trump was going to declare victory.
Yep.
And then he will, and if Harris is announced with the win for total votes, then he goes into his massive election stolen mode and just unleashes a whole torrent of lawsuits and everything across all of these states. That is, I am 100% guaranteed, bet my life that is what happens. That's what they're setting this all up for.
Yeah, exactly right.
So the election will be, I think we'll probably know the results within a couple days after, the November 5th. I have a feeling we're going to have a state or two that's going to be really close that we're not going to have. We're going to have to spend some time doing some counting, getting that done. But before the end of that week, certainly by Thursday, Friday, I think even Wednesday or Thursday, could be Friday, I think we would probably know. But the election will not be over until she is, assuming she wins the electoral vote. It will not be over until January 20th when she's sworn in, exactly, because they will fight this every step of the way.
Exactly right. No, I don't think, and I mean, I think it is definitely the case. And he's going to use everything he can. And by the way, we all know that the Republicans are already trying to do some of this stuff that they've done, and certain things in Georgia and other places. So so between the time the election is decided and between January 20th, it's going to be a redo of the nightmare of widespread election fraud. I will not rule out, and I hope I am wrong.
Yeah,
I will not rule out some sporadic violence.
I think you're right. I'm very concerned about that.
And I think we need to know that. Now, the difference between now and 4 years ago is Joe Biden will be president on Inauguration Day.
You're right.
And so they're going to be ready.
Yeah.
No one's going to be caught off guard if mob descends upon the Capitol. I'm not sure that will happen anyway. I think there will be some who show up. But there was just a story in our news here, a local person, a person who lives locally here, was just arrested for his involvement in the Capitol riot. 4 years ago. So, I think with the way that played out, I think it's not going to be what some people think it's going to be, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are people who show up there. And of course, if they want
Yeah,
to show up to protest peacefully, they're welcome to do that, right?
right.
But I think that Joe Biden will be ready and it will go off smoothly. Kamala Harris will be become the president of the United States, and then
Right.
it'll then be interesting to watch as to what happens to the Republican Party over the next 4 years.
Yeah.
Will they now do a reset?
Yeah.
Which I desperately think they need.
Yes.
Um,
But
but we'll
will
see
that
what
happen?
happens. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that may be a topic for a future show because
Yeah.
either way, whether let's assume Kamala Harris wins, we still had 47, 46, 48% of the people vote for this guy who's
Yeah.
advertising that he wants to be a fascist dictator.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
so we got a problem bigger than Donald Trump.
Yeah.
The first step has to be to get Donald Trump out of the picture before we can begin to address some of these things at other levels, I think, because to take his ability to keep stoking the misinformation and the fears, and I suspect that once he is out of the picture, if he loses this election, that Republicans may cannibalize. I mean, there'll be no central leader around which to focus because he will have squelched everybody who has real leadership capabilities, and they'll all cannibalize on each other. What comes of that, I have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so anyway, some hairy days ahead. But I think we've already been doing it. But I think going forward in the future, no matter who wins this election, we have to do some deep dive reflections on our country and on our politics and our civics,
Right.
as to why we are in this place and how do we get out of it.
How do we get out of it? That's right. Yeah. We're in a place where there are people who are okay with fascism because for them, democracy isn't working, which means they're not
Right.
what they want. So
Right.
that's where they are. So, yep. Okay, Michael. Well, we'll do that at some point. We'll
Yeah.
have a lot of stuff to talk about and
all sorts of other cheery things like that.
lots of cheery things. So, yeah, next month we'll probably do a review of what's going on,
Yeah.
and we'll see what happens from there. But anyway, appreciate it
Yeah.
as always. So, friends, thank you for joining us. By the way, before you leave, if you're watching on YouTube, click the subscribe button. It's free and it helps us. And if you're listening on a podcast, you can follow along as well, and we would appreciate that. So give us a thumbs up. All right, friends, this is Faith Seeking Understanding. I'm Alan Bevere, and the patron saint of Faith Seeking Understanding is Anselm of Canterbury, who said, I do not understand in order to believe, but I believe in order to understand. So, friends, keep seeking.